for like things like Stadia, but let's say all these are open and available right now. Indie dev, I can just spend the time, resources, dev kits, whatever, to go out on these platforms. What do you think's going to be best for indies to approach with these new types of platforms, and how to go about it?
I think it's tough because indie developers don't have the same marketing budget that a AAA developer has, and so for things like specifically like Stadia and Epic, where Epic is curated, Stadia is obviously curated because they partner and release whatever games. I think that makes it really difficult for an indie developer, because a lot of times it seems like the indie developer's word of mouth is more viral. So it's like they rely on something like Steam, where they can just put their game out there that may or may not be good, and then hopefully the community will pick it up and love it. Whereas if you would send it off to Epic, Epic might look at it and say, "Oh no, this doesn't fit our community guidelines," or or whatever, and then just toss it out. Whereas if it's on Steam first and gets the following, then Epic might approach them and say, "Hey, we noticed your game is doing really well. Would you like to also have it on Epic?"
Yeah, and I think I was just going to say, I think you make a really good point, too, about the community aspect of it. Because, with Stadia, I know they talked about features where, like, you can comment on, like, gameplay or video, kind of like you can do with, YouTube and stuff. But I think that element is, while there's a community aspect of it, it's not the same that you find on Steam. And there's those factors that kind of weigh in terms of helping people make those, purchasing decisions and other things in terms of, like you said, word of mouth. So,
it's tough because if you go all in for Epic or Stadia, you're relying on them to choose your games.
Right. Yep.
And that's, I want to play this game, or I want to play this type of game, but, Epic doesn't think that I should be able to play that type. Well, I mean, obviously not to that extent.
Right.
But, Epic has not approved any of these games, therefore I don't get to play them, assuming that you were just using the Epic client exclusively.
Mm-hmm.
But, like I have, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the new GOG Galaxy 2.0, but it curates all of your systems, or aggregates, rather, all of your systems. So I have mine set up for PlayStation, Epic Store, the Ubisoft Store, whatever that one's called, Steam, Nintendo, Xbox, like all the major ones, and then it just aggregates them all. So you can say, "Oh, do I own this game?" And then it'll say, "Yes, you own this on Xbox One and Steam." And you just click, "I want to play it now," and then it'll just pop up whatever client needs to play it, and you play it. And you can add games from every system ever made, like systems that even aren't online. You obviously can't play them that way, but you could if you wanted to keep track of your collection. It's a really, really cool tool.
That's interesting. Mustapha, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think the good thing about the kind of indie stance on this is that you've got the advantage of kind of intimate communication with your community. If we're talking about people who maybe during development have developed somewhat of a following, which can be the case sometimes, I would say really just taking the opportunity to poll and find out where is your community, where is your audience, and how could I get to that audience without necessarily using resources you don't have to. Like if you're not going to sell on the Epic Game Store, probably don't spend a lot of time campaigning to get on there. And it is a little bit harder because, like I said, you've got that lack of resources and you have to try and find a way to make that work. But yeah, I could see definitely where having it diversify at this stage probably poses a lot of problems. I think this is really just one of those changes that is kind of going to be the direction of the industry. I think we're going to see this happen more, and so I think as it does, we'll probably find our footing a little bit better, or it will all crash and burn, and we'll just go back to Steam. So,
Steam's always waiting for us with open arms.
Oh man, part of this in a much different context to an extent reminds me of the whole Blu-ray and HD DVD war, and I just felt bad for everybody. I don't think the same type of problem would be potentially happening here, but I just felt bad for everybody who invested all that money in HD DVDs, and because then it's like then you would see them at like flea markets or tag sales for like $5 for these but
I picked up an HD DVD player for my Xbox 360 recently at a thrift store for like a couple dollars. I just thought it was a cool oddity. I will never use it, but I just thought it was a neat oddity.
That's awesome. But yeah, there you go. So, but unfortunately, we don't. I don't know. Maybe a Stadia controller become one of those oddities, or not. I'm not trying to say anything about Stadia at all from that, but who knows where it will take us? What?
It happened to the Ouya. I remember that.
Yeah. You're right. The Ouya. You're right. Absolutely right.
Well, to be fair, I would argue that the Stadia is off to a little bit better of a start.
Oh no, you are 100% right. But Google does have a history of axing products
like Google Glass. But anyways,
in college had an Ouya, and so we did give it a try every now and again, just for like the novelty's sake. I think that one was kind of a train wreck from start to finish. They couldn't even, while they were campaigning for it, they didn't even know what the best selling games were.
Yeah.
Or what games would be. It's perfect. If anybody can, actually, I would highly recommend. There are a lot of videos documenting the marketing campaign for the Ouya, and it is a treat. It's hilarious.
I did back one on Kickstarter. I have one in my office right now. I have not touched it in years.
Is there anything you don't have, Justin? Is really what we won't get into that, but just
I don't have a Stadia controller.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, we talked about that, and what to be mindful, and I think really what it just comes down to is just go what's right for your game. Obviously, I mean that was pretty obvious, but and these things are all really new. So we, like you said, Mustapha, we just gotta want to get a better footing on these types of things, and I think it will help kind of dictate what our decisions or what indie devs' decisions are going to be moving forward. I mean, right now, basically, I would say just keep the status quo, if you will, in terms of going on those platforms that make the most sense for your game.
I do want to bring up one more thing about the Epic Game Store that I had read, and that is that if you, for indie developers, the Epic Game Store will basically buy you out if you put your game on there. I mean, they won't buy you out per se, but they will guarantee that you will make your budget back. So they will say, if you put your game on our system exclusively for whatever period of time, and you don't make X amount of money, you don't make your $100,000 back, we'll just write you a check for $100,000.
Yeah.
So it does take the risk off of a lot of developers. Obviously, it's going to be a lot harder to get into the Epic Game Store, but if you think that that's a good path for your game, and you're worried about recouping your budget, especially in today's overcrowded market, Epic might be a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean it's good to say that, but then I think also it's good to be mindful too of what does that long term look like, where they know they're new and everything, and buying into something. I shouldn't say buying in, but agreeing to something like that could be helpful for you to as a developer to get your next step, but. What also does that mean long term? Because if it's an exclusive deal where it's only on that store, I mean that could be somewhat limiting too. But it's hard to say. It's really hard to say.
It's tough. It's one of those things that if you put all your eggs in one basket, and then that basket you got to figure out where that basket's going. And I don't think Epic does perpetuity for their agreements, their exclusivity. I think it's only a period of time.
Okay.
But I guess you'd have to contact them. And I just want to say, don't write them off as being, the competitor to Steam, therefore we're going to not go that route. Because if you're worried about making your budget back, Epic might be a good place to go.
Yeah. No, good. Definitely good to make note of. All right. So in light of Epic, though, or not necessarily Epic, but we've been talking about Steam here and there. In this year, too, we've noticed some big changes as well, particularly since September. We made some big changes with Steam, which was I'm trying to remember. It was the store update and other things like that, right? And I know that we had developers there that were seeing all these wish lists, for example, coming in, and the next thing you know, they just stopped, or people were deleting their wish list. There was a competition that was going out that was big, a little confused. I mean, so there's a lot of changes there. And then I also I think I'm trying to remember, Justin, I think you were talking about this earlier before this. Nintendo was making, there's people making a lot of or there were updates with their store, and then
it's not that there were updates. It was that they never put in a real. There's not. How when you go to Steam, you can organize by every conceivable method. If you want to look for games that are action RPG with fantasy elements and anime, you can click on all those, things, and it'll list off the 100 or so games.
Hello?
Hey.
Did you hear that?
I heard, no.
Okay. Hold on a second. I'm going to pause.
Yeah, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Nintendo Store, it's not that they don't have a search function per se, because you can search out games by name, and there are like genres and stuff, but it's not as easy to find different things as it is on Steam. So to combat that, developers have been discounting their games very steeply. So one of the front pages that the Nintendo Store does have is a bestsellers page where you can go on and see all the games that are really popular this past week or however long they have it up for. And so developers will discount their games to like 90% off to try to get people to just impulse buy, their $10 game for $1. Oh, well, why not? And then it will hopefully for them make its way to the best sellers page, and then they can take the sale off, and then they will sell their game for full price. And apparently that's been working for a lot of developers, because every week I log in and I see tons of very, very steeply discounted games, like decent games too. It's not garbage or anything like that. So that's what Nintendo's doing.
Yeah, that's kind of, it's almost like, it sounds similar to what other developers were doing on Steam too, with like changing their launch date. Because as it got closer to launch date, like, people would start like coming and visiting the page more often. But what people would do is they keep changing the launch date. So now it's more of a process where you can't just like, pretty much you can't game the system anymore.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah. So and Mustapha, like, what are your thoughts of the Steam store like changing up in September, and then just indie devs, especially those that aren't don't have their product out yet, and they're still developing, but they're relying on the traffic and exposure to those pages, and then just having that huge reduction in wish lists. I mean, those are some really key things that people need in order to kind of make it as they approach launch. And now like wish lists are not what they used to be. So what are your thoughts on that process in terms of just the thing as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say it's probably a little bit reflective, I guess, not to double down on my earlier point, but of what happens when, you kind of have a standard for storefronts and platforms is that, companies have kind of the freedom to do things like this with little to no repercussion and little to no warning. These sorts of changes. And I think, to step away from games for a second, I think the easiest parallel I can draw is YouTube. I think YouTube is constantly making adjustments to their platform with little to no warning or foresight that really has the potential to impact people's livelihoods.
Where are you gonna go?
Yeah, exactly. Like, and then it becomes a matter of like, well, what are our other options? And so I think these breakout platforms kind of are the solution. Like, you cannot put all of the power in one place. It's just not. It's not a good look. If developers are dependent on a company that can make drastic changes at the drop of a hat, okay, you're in an industry that's already dramatically unstable, even by entertainment standards. Like, this is, these are kind of the consequences of that, I believe.
Yeah, and one thing that is actually really top of mind for me right now, and is actually we just recently interviewed someone for a guest for our next podcast coming in January next month, and when you saying that and talking about how these essentially these entities can kind of just change things at a whim for whatever reason. And then, it really comes down to not just having that much control, and that's a big important thing to have is control. But in a lot of cases, we realize that there's only so much that we can. So one thing, at least what this podcast was, this next episode coming about was mostly talking about was email marketing, because it's one way to have a little bit more. I wouldn't call it direct control, but you can definitely better influence your audience and have a good fan base and really influence their decisions based off of how you interact with them. But I think another way that I'm starting to see, or at least I feel I'm starting to see more direction going on in this, is when you have elements that are out of your control. Well,